January 11, 1944. A bitter winter wind swept across the snow-covered hills surrounding Adlerhorst, Adolf Hitler's headquarters in western Germany. Frost clung to pine branches, and the silence of the forest stood in sharp contrast to the tension inside the command bunker. Maps covered the tables. Colored pins marked Allied positions stretching from the North Sea to the Swiss border. Staff officers moved quietly between rooms, carrying reports that grew more alarming by the hour. Germany was losing. In the east, the Red Army had driven the Wehrmacht hundreds of miles backward. In the west, Allied armies that had landed in Normandy just 7 months earlier had liberated Paris and reached Germany's frontier. Every week, more American divisions arrived in Europe. Every day, Allied bombers struck German factories, railways, and fuel depots. Yet Adolf Hitler refused to accept that the war had become defensive. Instead, he proposed one final offensive. His objective was breathtaking in its ambition. German armored forces would smash through the snow-covered Ardennes forest, cross the Meuse River, capture the vital port of Antwerp, split the British and American armies apart, and force the Western Allies into negotiating peace. Many officers in the room listened in silence. Among them stood SS Oberstgruppenführer Sepp Dietrich, commander of the Sixth SS Panzer Army. He was no stranger to bold operations. He had led armored formations through France, the Balkans, and the Soviet Union. He understood the speed and violence required for a successful breakthrough. But as Dietrich studied the maps, another picture emerged. His divisions lacked experienced crews. Many tanks had barely enough fuel to reach the starting line. Replacement soldiers had little combat experience. Roads through the Ardennes were narrow, icy, and easily blocked. Worst of all, the offensive depended on capturing Allied fuel dumps almost immediately. Without American gasoline, Germany's powerful Panther and Tiger tanks would simply stop. The plan demanded speed, surprise, and perfect coordination at a moment when Germany possessed fewer resources than at any point since the war began. Before a single shell had been fired. Before a single German tank had crossed the frontier. Sepp Dietrich had already reached a conclusion that history would ultimately confirm. The Ardennes offensive was not merely risky. It was asking the impossible. And within days, thousands of German soldiers would discover just how costly that impossible gamble would become. To understand why Sepp Dietrich viewed the Ardennes offensive with such skepticism, it is necessary to look at Germany's military position during the final months of 1944. The plan did not emerge from a position of strength. It was born from desperation. Only 6 months earlier, on June 6, 1944, Allied forces had landed on the beaches of Normandy in the largest amphibious invasion in history. Operation Overlord shattered Germany's defensive shield in Western Europe. Despite fierce resistance, the Wehrmacht could not contain the expanding bridgehead. By late August, Paris had been liberated, and German forces were retreating toward their own borders. The retreat was costly. Thousands of experienced soldiers had been killed or captured during the collapse of the Falaise Pocket. Hundreds of tanks, artillery pieces, and transport vehicles were abandoned because they lacked fuel or became trapped in congested roads under constant Allied air attack. Entire divisions that had once been considered elite existed only on paper. At the same time, events in the East were even more devastating. The Soviet Union launched Operation Bagration in June 1944, destroying Germany's Army Group Center in one of the greatest military defeats in German history. Nearly 30 German divisions were shattered. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers were killed, wounded, or taken prisoner. The Red Army advanced hundreds of kilometers toward East Prussia and the Vistula River, bringing Soviet forces closer to Germany itself than ever before. Germany now faced powerful enemies on both fronts. To make matters worse, Allied strategic bombing intensified throughout 1944. Day and night, formations of American B-17 Flying Fortresses, B-24 Liberators, and British Lancaster bombers targeted factories, rail junctions, bridges, synthetic fuel plants, and transportation networks. Although German industry continued producing remarkable quantities of weapons under Armaments Minister Albert Speer, the cost became increasingly severe. Fuel was the greatest crisis. Germany possessed advanced tanks, formidable anti-tank guns, and some of the world's finest military engineering. Yet even the most powerful Panther or Tiger tank became useless without gasoline. Synthetic fuel plants, which supplied much of Germany's military fuel, were repeatedly struck by Allied bombers. Deliveries became unreliable. Tank crews often received only enough fuel for limited training or none at all. Pilots faced the same reality. The Luftwaffe still manufactured aircraft, but experienced pilots were increasingly irreplaceable, and aviation fuel shortages meant many new pilots completed only a fraction of the training they would have received earlier in the war. Logistics had become Germany's invisible enemy. Railroads damaged by bombing delayed reinforcements. Bridges collapsed under repeated attacks. Ammunition reached frontline units late. Spare parts accumulated in warehouses that transport units could no longer access efficiently. Meanwhile, the Allies experienced the opposite problem. American industry continued delivering astonishing quantities of tanks, trucks, aircraft, fuel, ammunition, and food across the Atlantic. Although Allied armies temporarily outran their own supply lines after the breakout from Normandy, they possessed the industrial capacity to solve logistical problems faster than Germany could create them. By the autumn of 1944, many Allied commanders believed Germany was nearing collapse. Some expected the war in Europe to end before Christmas. Hitler disagreed completely. He believed the Western Allies formed an uneasy coalition that could be broken by one decisive defeat. If Germany could split the British and American armies, seize the port of Antwerp, and create political panic in London and Washington, perhaps negotiations might follow. It was an extraordinarily ambitious objective, echoing the bold offensives that had brought Germany victory in 1940. But 1944 was not 1940. Germany no longer possessed overwhelming numerical superiority, secure fuel reserves, or complete control of the skies. Instead, it prepared for one final gamble. The burden of leading the main assault would fall upon Sepp Dietrich's Sixth SS Panzer Army, one of the strongest armored formations Germany could still assemble. On paper, it appeared formidable, containing elite Waffen-SS divisions equipped with Panther and Tiger II tanks. Yet Dietrich understood that impressive equipment did not guarantee success. He knew many crews had little combat experience. Maintenance units struggled to keep heavy tanks operational. Fuel allocations were dangerously limited. Narrow forest roads through the Ardennes would force entire armored columns into predictable routes where a single destroyed vehicle could halt an advance for hours. Most importantly, the timetable demanded almost flawless execution. Every bridge had to be captured intact. Every road junction cleared quickly. Every delay multiplied the risk that Allied reserves would arrive. The offensive depended not only on defeating American forces but on outrunning time itself. It was this reality, more than optimism or pessimism, that convinced Sepp Dietrich the operation demanded far more than Germany could realistically deliver. And when the attack finally began before dawn on December 16, 1944, those fears would begin colliding with reality almost immediately. On the morning of December 16, 1944, silence settled over the snow-covered Ardennes. Then, at 5:30 a.m., thousands of German artillery guns opened fire almost simultaneously. Shells crashed into American positions across an 80-mile front, shaking forests that had been quiet only moments before. It was the opening of what would become known as the Battle of the Bulge. For a brief moment, Hitler's gamble appeared to be working. The attack caught many American units by surprise. Thick winter fog grounded most Allied aircraft, allowing German columns to move without immediate air attack. Infantry advanced through wooded valleys while armored divisions pushed toward key road junctions. American outposts were overwhelmed, prisoners were taken, and confusion spread throughout parts of the Allied front. Yet beneath these early successes, the problems Sepp Dietrich had feared were already emerging. The Ardennes was one of the most difficult regions in Western Europe for an armored offensive. Dense forests covered steep hills. Roads twisted through narrow valleys, often allowing only a single column of vehicles to pass. Snow and ice made driving hazardous, particularly for Germany's heavy Panther and Tiger II tanks. Unlike the rapid advances across France in 1940, there was almost no room for maneuver. If one vehicle broke down, became stuck, or was destroyed, everything behind it stopped. This happened repeatedly. Convoys stretching for kilometers became trapped behind disabled tanks or horse-drawn supply wagons struggling through frozen roads. Engineers worked frantically to clear obstacles, but every delay consumed precious hours. The offensive depended on relentless speed. Instead, traffic jams became one of Germany's greatest enemies. Fuel shortages made the situation even worse. Each Tiger II tank consumed enormous quantities of gasoline simply moving across difficult terrain. German planners had calculated fuel requirements carefully, but the numbers depended upon rapid progress. Every unexpected delay meant engines continued burning fuel while stationary. Recovery vehicles themselves required gasoline. Trucks carrying fuel struggled to reach advancing spearheads through congested roads. Dietrich understood the danger immediately. His orders assumed German forces would capture American fuel depots within the first days of the offensive. Without those supplies, the attack could not continue. It was one of the most extraordinary assumptions of the entire operation. Germany had planned one of the largest armored offensives of the war while depending partly upon using the enemy's fuel to complete it. That alone revealed how desperate the Reich's situation had become. Then another problem appeared. Resistance proved stronger than expected. American engineers destroyed bridges before German units could seize them. Small groups of infantry held crossroads far longer than German planners anticipated. Villages that seemed insignificant on maps became stubborn defensive positions, forcing armored units to halt while infantry cleared the area. Every hour mattered. Every delay reduced the chance of reaching the Meuse River before Allied reinforcements arrived. The weather had initially favored Germany, but winter conditions also punished German logistics just as severely. Vehicles became stranded. Communications broke down. Maintenance crews struggled to repair damaged equipment in freezing temperatures. Despite these obstacles, Dietrich's armored formations continued pushing westward. But with every kilometer, his original doubts grew stronger. The operation demanded perfection. The battlefield delivered reality. And reality rarely follows even the most ambitious plans. By December 17, 1944, the German offensive had created a deep bulge in the Allied front. Newspapers in the United States would later give the battle its famous name, the Battle of the Bulge. For Adolf Hitler, the breakthrough seemed to confirm that his gamble had been justified. But Sepp Dietrich saw a very different picture. His Sixth SS Panzer Army, positioned on the northern flank, was not advancing according to the timetable. Every delay multiplied the problems that had worried him from the beginning. Roads remained clogged with tanks, half-tracks, artillery, fuel trucks, horse-drawn wagons, and infantry. Engineers struggled to repair bridges capable of carrying 70-ton Tiger II tanks. Frozen roads became bottlenecks where a single disabled vehicle could halt an entire column. Time, more than the Americans, had become Germany's greatest enemy. One of the most important objectives assigned to Dietrich's army was the capture of the Elsenborn Ridge. The high ground dominated the road network leading west toward the Meuse River. German planners expected the American defenders to collapse quickly. They did not. The U.S. 2nd Infantry Division and 99th Infantry Division, supported by artillery, transformed the ridge into one of the strongest defensive positions of the campaign. Despite repeated attacks by experienced Waffen-SS formations, the Americans held their ground. Accurate artillery fire shattered German assaults while anti-tank guns forced armored units to withdraw again and again. The failure at Elsenborn carried consequences far beyond the battlefield. Without control of those roads, Dietrich's armored spearheads could not achieve the speed demanded by Hitler's plan. Every lost hour gave the Allies more time to react. Elsewhere, another unexpected obstacle emerged. Small American units refused to surrender. Road junctions that appeared insignificant on operational maps became scenes of fierce resistance. Engineers demolished bridges moments before German tanks arrived. Military police redirected retreating soldiers into new defensive lines. Communications officers restored telephone connections under artillery fire. Even isolated platoons delayed German columns long enough for reinforcements to arrive. One town became particularly significant: St. Vith. Located at a critical road intersection, the town controlled several routes essential to the German advance. American defenders, reinforced throughout the battle, resisted far longer than German planners expected. Although St. Vith eventually fell, the delay disrupted the offensive's carefully calculated timetable. Further south, another name entered military history: Bastogne. The crossroads town was quickly surrounded by German forces, but the American 101st Airborne Division, reinforced by elements of other units, refused to surrender. Their stubborn defense prevented Germany from controlling one of the most important transportation hubs in the Ardennes. For Dietrich, these battles confirmed what he had feared during the planning stage. The operation assumed that every objective would fall rapidly. Instead, every major objective demanded precious time. Then the weather changed. For nearly a week, thick clouds and winter fog had protected German forces from Allied air power. But around December 23, the skies cleared. The transformation was immediate. Hundreds of Allied fighter bombers filled the air. P-47 Thunderbolts and Typhoons attacked German columns trapped on exposed roads. Bridges became targets. Fuel trucks exploded under rocket attacks. Supply convoys scattered into forests. Vehicles that survived often abandoned movement during daylight, further slowing the offensive. At the same time, Allied transport aircraft began dropping supplies into Bastogne, allowing the surrounded defenders to continue fighting. The logistical balance shifted completely. While Germany struggled to deliver gasoline to the front, the Allies supplied isolated troops by air and moved fresh armored divisions toward the battlefield. General George S. Patton's Third Army, executing one of the war's most remarkable operational maneuvers, turned north and advanced toward Bastogne far faster than German intelligence believed possible. On December 26, 1944, elements of the 4th Armored Division reached the town, breaking the encirclement. Hitler's timetable had collapsed. The Meuse River remained far away. Antwerp was completely beyond reach. German armored divisions had consumed enormous quantities of irreplaceable fuel, ammunition, and experienced soldiers for gains they could no longer exploit. For Sepp Dietrich, the campaign had become exactly what he had predicted. Not a decisive victory. Not even a sustainable offensive. But an impossible operation whose greatest enemy had never been the American army alone. It had been the unforgiving mathematics of logistics, fuel, terrain, weather, and time. And within the first weeks of January 1945, the consequences of that failed gamble would leave Germany weaker than ever before, with no realistic chance of mounting another major offensive in the West. By early January 1945, the Ardennes offensive was over. The last German attacks had failed. Units that had fought their way deep into Belgium were now withdrawing through the same snow-covered forests they had crossed only weeks earlier. But this time, there was no confidence. There was no expectation of victory. There was only survival. The retreat exposed the true cost of Hitler's final gamble. Germany had committed many of its remaining elite armored formations to the offensive. Some of the Waffen-SS divisions under Sepp Dietrich entered the battle with experienced crews and modern Panther and Tiger II tanks. They emerged with heavy losses in men and equipment that could never be fully replaced. Even more devastating was the loss of fuel. Every abandoned tank represented not only destroyed machinery but months of industrial effort that Germany could no longer afford. Recovery vehicles lacked gasoline to tow damaged armor. Workshops lacked spare parts. Railroads damaged by Allied bombing struggled to deliver replacements to the front. For every tank Germany lost, America built several more. The imbalance that Dietrich had feared from the beginning had become overwhelming. Hitler had hoped the Ardennes offensive would split the Allied coalition and force Britain and the United States into peace negotiations. Instead, the opposite occurred. The offensive strengthened Allied cooperation. American, British, Canadian, and other Allied forces coordinated more closely than ever before. Commanders rapidly shifted divisions across the front, proving that the Western Allies possessed the logistical flexibility Germany could no longer match. The battle also accelerated Germany's strategic collapse. On January 12, 1945, only days after the Ardennes offensive effectively ended, the Soviet Union launched the Vistula-Oder offensive in the east. German reserves that might have strengthened the Eastern Front had already been consumed in Belgium and Luxembourg. The Red Army advanced with extraordinary speed, reaching the Oder River less than 70 kilometers from Berlin. Germany no longer possessed the strength to stop simultaneous offensives on two fronts. For Sepp Dietrich, the failure confirmed what he had believed before the first shot was fired. The operation had demanded perfect timing, overwhelming speed, secure fuel supplies, and uninterrupted logistics. Germany possessed none of those advantages. Years later, historians would continue debating whether the Ardennes offensive ever had a realistic chance of success. Some argue that surprise gave Germany its last operational opportunity in the West. Others conclude that the capture of Antwerp had always been beyond Germany's military capabilities by late 1944. Yet on one point, there is broad agreement. The offensive consumed Germany's final strategic reserve without changing the course of the war. The Battle of the Bulge became the largest battle ever fought by the United States Army, involving more than 600,000 American troops. It also became Germany's last major offensive on the Western Front. After January 1945, the Wehrmacht could no longer seize the initiative. It could only retreat. Sepp Dietrich's doubts were not born from fear or lack of courage. He had spent years leading armored formations through some of the fiercest campaigns of the Second World War. He understood exactly what successful offensives required. That experience allowed him to recognize something many political leaders refused to accept. Determination cannot replace logistics. Ambition cannot replace fuel. And optimism cannot overcome mathematics. The Ardennes offensive remains one of history's most remarkable military gambles, not because it almost succeeded, but because it demonstrated the enormous gap between political ambition and military reality. The snow eventually melted across the Ardennes. The burned-out tanks were removed from the roads. The forests grew quiet once more. But the lessons of December 1944 endured. A commander may inspire his soldiers. A brilliant plan may achieve surprise. An army may fight with extraordinary determination. Yet in modern warfare, victory belongs not only to courage on the battlefield, but to the nation that can sustain its armies with fuel, supplies, transportation, and industry. For Sepp Dietrich, that truth was visible before the offensive even began. For Germany, it became undeniable by the time the last shots echoed through the frozen forests of the Ardennes.